How are you?
What's up? I'm awesome. How are you, my friend?
Oh, it's an amazing day, really. Like there's so many extraordinary things happening. I'm just going to close down my WhatsApp. Here we go. Bye bye WhatsApp. So I won't be clicking away and distracting me. So we had this emotional bento box concept pop up today in today's email, which I thought was just fabulous. And the idea, I'll explain for people listening or watching why that matters. So I'm talking about the emotional guidance system, right? So the emotional guidance system is if you feel a negative emotion, it means that you're out of alignment with how your inner self is seeing things versus how you are. And that's normally because you have a limiting belief, and a limiting belief is a belief where you don't have sufficient information. So if you're feeling bad, then generally you know you're out of alignment, and somewhere in there you can find the core of a limiting belief, and you can prove it to be false. And if you're feeling good, then it means that you're in alignment with your inner self. So that's the emotional guidance system. Now, so when we think about that and we think about a manifestation event, which is normally an event where you feel an intense emotion, mostly a negative one, but sometimes a positive one, and that's a manifestation event which signals to you that you either have a limiting belief or an empowering belief. So we got that whole framework that we work in. And then today, Joshua says to us, well, we will call this concept, which I'm about to describe, the emotional bento box. And it's the observation, which is pretty obvious when you think about it, that when something happens, you actually feel a mix of positive and negative emotions. So you may be focusing on the negative emotion to find the limiting belief, but in many apparently negative events, there are actually several positive emotions. And so I had a very trivial example of that happen this morning around fish. So a friend texted me on the weekend and said, hey, the fishing boats just come into the wharf down in the village here in the harbour, and they're selling fresh fish on the wharf. So we scooted down and bought some fresh fish, bought quite a lot, and that was really awesome. And then we went, because we live like an hour and a half from the city, we went into town the other day and we did a big shop. And so when we got home, Trace was filling up the freezer. And so that's all good. The freezer is full. So much so that there's hardly any room for ice for my aperitif. You know, like a Pernod. I bought some Pernod, you know, like pastis. Anyway, I digress. But I noticed that room where the freezer is was kind of smelly the last few days. And I thought, you know, has the cat left a little message somewhere? Well, what the hell is that smell? And it smells a bit fishy. And I thought, I cooked fish like several days ago. It shouldn't still be smelling fishy around that area. And so this morning I was looking everywhere to see what the hell's that smell. And then I saw what had happened, that I realized Trace had made room in the freezer for a minute by putting 2 packets of frozen fish that we just bought fresh down at the wharf. She put them on top of the freezer and then she forgot about them. So they've been sitting there in the warm summer weather for several days, getting stinkier and stinkier by the day. So on the surface of it, that's a negative event because we bought this beautiful fresh fish and now it's spoiled and it's not edible. But my first reaction was, a good one, because finally found the source of the stink, you know, what I thought was cat business. And also maybe the cat doesn't normally do this, by the way, unless she's been locked in the house forever. And also the fishy smell. So my first, even though it was like spoiled food, my first reaction was, this is really good. I've solved this problem. Second reaction was, that's a pity because that fish was amazing. Third thing was, never mind, we can go down the wharf and buy some more if he comes in this weekend. And then I said to Trace, I'll just leave it wrapped up and we'll chuck it in the rubbish, and that way it won't stink out the rubbish. And she said, no, it can be a treat for the cat. I'll chop it all up into cubes and, you know, we'll refreeze it and, you know, shake it around and free float, and the cat can have this beautiful fresh fish diet for the next week or two. So I thought that's very interesting in a very trivial way, because on the surface, that's annoying that we've ruined this amazing fish, but then there were all these other emotions too. So I thought that's actually true, that there are a range of emotions, and I'm not quite sure why, but today's lesson was about recognizing the whole range of emotions around an event. And I suppose it's to understand that negative events are not only negative, and there's that example they gave of you lose your job and the string of negative and positive thoughts that might follow from that. And if you're really upset about it, you may not acknowledge the positive ones, but they are still there, such as maybe I'll be able to get a job I really like, or I didn't really like that job anyway, or they made that decision for me, or whatever it might be. I've got some free time now before I start my next contract, or whatever it might be, So it is true, isn't it, that in a negative event, and it's easy to see in a trivial one like fish, that there are actually a range of positive and negative emotions. And it's not just a matter of trying to turn it on its head. I didn't do that consciously or deliberately. I just noticed that most of my emotions around that event were positive, not negative. And yet one's description of that event was Trace left the fish out and it spoiled. And what a pity, because we paid all that money for beautiful fresh fish and now we can't eat it. But overall, it was actually a positive event, which in a world of deep insights, that's pretty shallow, but there you go.
Yeah, the bento box was a really a fun concept, and it reminded me, and I think we talked about this last time, of that Chinese farmer analogy, right? Where his one horse runs off, 7 new the next day. His son is riding the horse. But the idea that all of these events that we like to take out as one simple event, it's just not. There are all these emotions and all these other events connected to it. Like, everything is connected along the way. And even in your description, it wasn't one event. It was a whole series. If you look at that and you put it on like this horizontal plane, you went and bought fish, right? Then you went to this market. Then, you put fish in the freezer. Then some was left out. Then you were able to refreeze it and feed your cat, right? There's like 10 different things attached, right, to this one little event. And the bento box concept is so brilliant because you realize that, we all like to jam it into just the one little square in that, but it's not. There are all these things supporting
that's true. Because even when we bought the fish, like, it was cash only, so we had to go back to the ATM to get some cash, because who has cash now? And then, exactly. So we got the cash, walked down the wharf, and there's a woman there, and I guess her husband is the fishing boat skipper, and she was looking after the stall down by the boat on the wharf, selling the fish. And she had a sort of a tarpaulin thing, and she was trying to secure it to give herself a bit of protection from the breeze and from the sun, maybe. And she was probably, I don't know, 70 something, very slim and fit sort of a woman, but she was having trouble working this out. So a past version of me, and maybe my impatient city mode, would have been, come on, can you do that later? Just sell me the fish already, sort of thing. But Trace and I just both instinctively started helping her attach this tarpaulin, to get it how she wanted. We probably spent 5 or 10 minutes trying to work out what she's trying to do as well. 5 or 10 minutes actually doing that. And it felt really good. And Joshua talks about the whole thing about practice conveying generous and kind and loving thoughts to the cashier or anyone else you bump into. And if nothing else, it's a much more fun way to go about things. So we did that with her, and it actually felt really good.
Yeah, and I want to touch on that, what you just said there, setting thoughts in a minute. But I do want to continue this bento box concept because I love it, and I love the idea that we all try to have one event have one meaning, right? But to your point, as you just described, it just doesn't work that way. It's not good or bad. It's a combination of everything, right? Even the worst possible scenarios, terrible. My mother had passed, right? Terrible. I went home for the funeral. I got to see all my high school friends. I got to see everybody. We went out to dinner. I got to spend all this amazing time and have these amazing conversations and all these beautiful reminiscence, situations, right? So no one event is one way. And that to me is, although we live it and we realize it, I don't think I was truly aware of it until I read that email and was like, oh my gosh, you're right.
So you've taken this to the next level beyond no one event is a single feeling. It's a range of feelings, some of which can be good and some can be unpleasant. You've taken it to the next level about the interconnectedness of events, right? And I'll just read the quote from today. When an event occurs in your reality, you don't usually feel just one emotion. While you may be able to categorize your entirety of emotions based on an event as negative or positive, it is more nuanced than that. Imagine if you were fired from a job you did not like. You feel a mix of emotions. You feel embarrassment, relief, insecurity, and hopefulness. You might be embarrassed by what others may think of you. You may feel a sense of relief now that your job is a thing of the past. You worry about paying your bills due to a lack of income. And while everything else is going on, you feel hopeful for the future. A single event usually brings forth a range of emotions. We will call this the emotional bento box. That's a killer phrase. I love it. For now, it is enough to realize that most events trigger many emotions simultaneously. Each emotion will have its own intensity. You will often feel negative and positive emotions at the same time. As you go about your day today, see if you can notice the range of emotions that pop up upon the occurrence of any event. So I read that and hey, presto, the fish thing happened as a simple illustration for me. I thought, that's good, that's good.
I love it. And the thing that is interesting to me, and I don't think I realized until I was reading this today, was that, so let's stay on the example that you get fired from your job. All those other emotions are almost supportive of your original feeling. So let's say I'm angry, I got fired, I lost my job, my boss did whatever. I'm glad I don't have a job. I didn't like working for him. I didn't, whatever those emotions come, I need some time to myself. I've been so stressed because of this job, right? There are all these emotions, but we do tend to just jam it. At least I do, and then maybe I'm wrong on a bigger level. But all the emotions, and Joshua's right, you feel all these emotions, but I usually create them, or I had created in the past, to support that one initial belief that I had about the reason why.
Right. And if you think primarily that the event is negative, such as the fish is spoiled or somebody lost a job, if you're experiencing that as a negative, then we kind of become like a magnet, and the magnet charges up and it attracts all of the supporting negative beliefs or feelings around it. Whereas in reality, there are a whole bunch of positive ones as well. But if you're wanting to go down the negative road, then you ain't going down the positive road at the same time. And it's interesting how we select in favor of the negative, whereas if you were to select in favor of the positive, and I'm not trying to do a Pollyanna on it, although it sounds somewhat Pollyanna-ish, I suppose. I was getting some transcriptions done, by the way, for a client, and I had these amazing English language transcription people, one in Pakistan, one in Kenya, one in the Philippines, and one in the States. But the one that got one of the non-American transcribers was the word Pollyanna-ish. I didn't get that one at all. And I thought, yeah, okay, that would be an incredible knowledge of English. Anyway, I did that road work. It was amazing, like amazing.
You and Jen can play with the words. You guys have a grasp of the English language like nobody I've ever experienced.
Yeah, a friend, you know how people are into food, they're foodies. Well, a friend of mine years ago, she said, oh, you're a wordy like me. So anyway, we're wordy friends. Yeah, anyway, I mean, I did study languages. I studied linguistics. I studied German, a little bit of German at school. I did a bit of Italian when I was an adult. I did French right through school, and I did half a year of French literature. I did our indigenous language for a year, Māori, Te Reo Māori. I did that for a year. And I did linguistics right through university as well. So yeah, I'm a somewhat, and I studied English literature as well, Renaissance literature to boot.
I love that.
Yeah, I'm a genuine wordy. I'm probably a qualified wordy, if there was such a thing. If there is such a thing, that's me. So anyway, where were we? We were, I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish, and I'm not trying to contrive this, but it just immediately became obvious to me that all the positive emotions were there in that event as well. And it was just a simple, beautiful example. Losing a job is a lot harder because the fears around money and what people will think and the shame and all those things, some of those fears will really push somebody's button. And so it's much easier to magnetize and attract all of the negative thoughts around that, isn't it, than to actually be aware of the positive, but they're there as well. And I got this feeling as we're talking about it that, because I got a meeting later today and I'm kind of slightly annoyed about it. It's a bit irksome. But there are actually some really good things about this meeting as well, and about the opportunities that can come out of it. And if I can, instead of thinking the negative, beep, beep in front of me, what if I actually think about all the positive things around it? I also want to do that exercise based on that meditation you talked about, to send a string of whatever, you can give me the words in a minute, a string of love from my heart to the hearts of the people in the meeting, the other people, and also to the business entity itself. So I'm trying to actually look at things that annoy me with love instead of disdain.
Wow, right? That's the next level, right? I mean, that's a big one. So two things, and I couldn't agree with you more with everything you just said. And Joshua said, I don't know, maybe a few months ago in one of his Joshua Lives, when you talk about starting with that negative, right? To your point, we use the example of losing a job. The minute you start feeling that anger, that negative fear, right? You send that signal out, and what you do, you expand into the potentiality of every possible negative feeling anybody in the world's ever had in that situation. So you actually unlock and open yourself up to negative and fearful experiences that have never been part of your life or part of your experience, but that is out there in the world. That to me was a huge statement. So what you
Yeah,
just
so
said
that's
was
like the
right.
current of fear or the current of negativity, and you're tapping into that energy and that current. And yet, if it's purely a mental construct to start with, because I said to Trace afterwards, without trying to reframe it in a positive way, without anything deliberate, the negative part of it is merely a thought. Because in what way, like if you put the fish in the freezer and forgot about it for a year, then it wouldn't have been part of your future enjoyment anyway, right? And we weren't thinking about that frozen fish. To be honest, I'd forgotten we had it. So the negative part of it was purely a thought. There was no experiential loss. It's different from physical pain or illness or how am I going to pay this bill or my payment or whatever tomorrow. Those are more real and immediate and tangible, although they are still thoughts, right? But this was a really good example. Like, yeah, the negative part of that is purely a thought. I imagine that I'm not going to have the pleasure of, the future pleasure of some fish. But on the other hand, I can go down, it's Friday here. Maybe the guy will be back in over the weekend with some more fish down at the wharf. And I can buy some more fresh fish. Doesn't cost a hell of a lot.
Absolutely. The idea that when an event happens, that we immediately judge the outcome, right? Good or bad, whatever that may be. And the idea that we open up the floodgates to your point, we magnetize, we immediately electrify all those negative ions or all those positive ions, whatever's out there, we immediately magnetize them, we electrify them, and we draw them to us. So to your point, losing a job could be the greatest thing on the planet. It could be the greatest thing on the planet. But because of social stigmas, we immediately magnetize all the negatives. That it solidifies where the bento box concept is just so smart and genius and so funny, right? Because we're all trying to put everything into one little corner. Well, it just doesn't work that way. There are all those.
How do we get to that point? Like, why? I mean, having said this, I mean, it's so obvious, it's almost trivial that it's obvious when you think about it that, yes, of course, events have these things about them, it's the nature of it. I guess it's like a lot of great scientific discoveries. Once somebody discovers something, you think, well, that was actually really obvious. It's just that nobody ever asked that question or looked there before.
I couldn't agree more. And I thought the same thing you just did, right? Where did it come from? And what pops in my mind is my upbringing, my childhood, my child rearing. When something happened, my parents put it in a small cubby. It was either good or bad. There was no leeway to see the upside, the positive, what may come of it. It was, I'm disappointed. That wasn't smart. That was stupid. That's going to hurt your future. You're going to hurt your future. That won't help you, right? It was never like, wow. So something just happened with my daughter, who's in college, and I was laughing. My wife was questioning my response, and I'm like, well, if somebody looking for a job, if she's going to look for a job, and all, I'm like, I don't even know if I'm going to be alive 4 years from now. Like, I don't even know what to say to that anymore. Like at this moment, at this point in time, this is funny. Like I don't know who's going to take it in 5 years from now, how the future is going to see it, or what it is. But at this point in time, it's just funny, and it's always like every lesson we give them is a lesson for the future. Well, how are they going to act? And I'm like, I don't know what to say to that. Like, express love today. Try to see everything, and if you try to see it originally as this, and once again, you're taking this bento box concept of all these different emotions. But if that top emotion, if the main feature in the bento box is love and is appreciation, all those other emotions will support it, right? In various ways. But understanding that it's not just one, that they're all connected. Don't try to confine it to that one single element and it being a complete disaster. Like that's huge for me.
Yeah.
I literally boxed off and walled off every event as a single individual event affecting my future.
Yeah. I was just thinking of the old expression that every cloud has a silver lining. So the thought does exist in our culture, but that's almost, if you try hard enough, you can see something positive in a bleak situation. Some of it also probably comes because oftentimes people in the past thought that life was hard, and people used to say stuff like life is hard and then you die, or life is this, that, and the other, and then you die. And I mean, those were kind of sardonic and slightly funny comments that people used to make, but they had an element of truth, or when I say truth, they reflected people's beliefs to quite a degree. There are a lot of people actually believe that.
Yeah, I mean, think about this too. You've talked and touched upon the essence of time. Everything's overlapping. Everything's happening at once. Dr. Jordan Peterson, in Ottawa, I think the Ottawa University professor, very, very famous psychologist, talks about as little as 150 years ago, life was hard. Life was miserable. Like women were married and had kids, started having kids at the age of 16. They had kids all the way up till they were 30. Half their kids died. They worked in the fields while they were pregnant, and then they died shortly after that. So the life expectancy was a little below 50. So, but we chose to come here at this point in time, right, for a specific reason. There's more money. There's more money today, right now, than in the entire history combined, cumulative, stacked on top. There's more freedom. There's more freedom now. There's more communication. There's more information. Think about the time we chose to come back and experience what we're experiencing, right? If it is true, there's 200 past lives, whatever the number may be, X, Y, or Z, right? And then today on the call with Jessica, we talked about addiction, right? Why we keep coming back at different times to experience. Maybe we want to experience addiction as the person who was addicted to whatever it may be. Maybe we want to come back as the parent of a child who's addicted. Maybe we want to come back as the doctor treating addiction. So we get to see all these different sides of what addiction is. To me, that, like, my head exploded. I'm like, holy cow. So we all came back at this point in time, this very specific point in time, when there is more freedom, more abundance, more information, more ability to take a deep breath and be aware of what we're talking about, and then put that to work. How does being a creator work when you are in early 1800s, when you are trying to build a field, sustainable food, you have nothing to eat, you're being attacked by different elements, half your kids are dying because of natural, I mean, how do you say I'm going to be my deliberate creator then? We're sitting in the perfect point in time to actually consider the concept that we are deliberate creators of our reality for the first time ever.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
And I agree with all of that. And there's a few perspectives I have on that. One is that how many people are aware of that and are making the most of that. And Joshua has said a number of times in recent podcasts or whatever, sessions, about how most people, so many people, go to college, get a good degree from a good college, get a good job that they deep down don't like or even dislike. They do that job for 40 years, they retire, they play golf, and they die, which kind of, to me, is an exercise in pointlessness. And we've talked about this before, and I've talked about lawyer friends who don't like their work.
That's the American dream, what you just described. Stop.
I know. It's the same. It's alive and well here as well. But Joshua also talks about this whole thing around how not that many years ago, before agriculture and horticulture came along, we were hunter-gatherers. Probably for the most of human existence, we were hunter-gatherers, which is a very, very harsh life. It's physically dangerous and far, far harder than the life in the fields, with agriculture and horticulture. So the idea is that our ancestors who are hunter-gatherers because of the intensity and difficulty of the unpleasantness of their life, they created this very, very strong desire, and that desire led to the creation of agriculture and horticulture, which in turn led to the creation of villages and towns, which in turn led to inventions, and it also led to the arts, because of the concentration of skills and talents and energy and all that sort of thing. And so then we're in this post primary industry world now, where all the wealth and so on comes from tech companies like Apple and Google and Facebook and so on. So we are in this extraordinary age, and yet so many people are really stuck in the thing I described before, that you do a job you don't particularly like or you dislike for 40 years, you play golf and then you die. Whereas you and I forced ourselves, well, some aspect of ourselves, inner selves or whatever, forced us out. I got this picture of squeezing peas in a pot, and we squeezed so hard those peas went boom, straight out of the American dream, right, into this new dream that we're creating. So we expelled ourselves, and for you and me, it had to be about money, because we probably wouldn't have paid attention otherwise to anything else. And so we ended up, and the same with Gary, it's like, okay, if you're not listening, then we're going to strike some blows around your money. Now you might listen. So that's what happened to us. And that's how we got catapulted out of the American or Kiwi dream into another world where, because what I'm now working towards quite strongly is doing work that I totally authentically love and believe in. So I know a lot about online marketing and all these other things, and making courses online and all that stuff, websites, da-da-da. And so what we're doing now is we're really, really focused on making courses on things that I really enjoy doing. Not only that, I'm thinking all the time about who will benefit from this and what else can I give them or really help them to get a meaningful result that is something they really want. And so for the first time ever, I'm feeling, oh, I can actually do authentic work that matches what I believe and can make a real difference. And it's not primarily about making a sale and bringing in the bucks, even if, because you and I both have been in business deals and sales and events and whatever, where we sold stuff we weren't particularly enamored of or didn't believe in. We just sold it because you got to make the sale, and you sold this thing, whatever it might have been, even if you didn't really believe in it completely, totally and utterly. And all my years in finance, I learned a lot about finance. I know a lot about that, but I never felt that it was from a place of integrity. And just for anybody who's interested in investments, for me, it was around, well, really, as long as you understand your risk profile with investments, your pie chart, right, which is partly a matter of your circumstances, your age, and your personal tolerance for risk. So you have your pie chart of how much is in stocks and how much is in real estate and how much is in cash and bonds or whatever. So once you know your pie chart, which is not that hard to do, like you don't even need AI, any simple computer program can make the pie chart. Once you know that, it's actually very easy to purchase assets in those asset classes, through like exchange traded funds or whatever. So in other words, you can have an index funds and that kind of thing. So in other words, you can end up with a portfolio that once you've got it, you don't have to do anything to it. The management fees are incredibly low, and you don't really need an advisor to do anything. You may want to rebalance it periodically if your stocks double in value, and so you decide to rebalance it, buy some more bonds or whatever. So ignoring what's happening in the market at the moment with inflation and rising interest rates and all of that, blah, blah, blah. So in other words, it is that simple. And then we used to charge fees for managing and doing that for people. And to be honest, I never thought, like, the fees were good for business, and it made the business very valuable, which is where I made my money when I sold out, because it's a multiple of earnings of the business, the old multiple of EBITDA thing, earnings, blah, blah, for interest tax, whatever. Anyway, so all of that made sense in that world, but I never felt authentic in finance, because I thought, we're really, it's knowledge arbitrage, and we're making money because we know more than those people do. Whereas you could actually give them a simple solution that costs next to nothing.
I made all of my money the same exact way, on taking something, marking it up, knowing what I would literally put a price on something based upon the commission or what I would make. Like, other people I knew would sell something, if we're just talking pennies, right? Oh, this is going to cost me a nickel. I'll sell for 7.5 cents. I'm like, that's going to cost me a nickel. And if you think about how you make money in life, right? Money's just energy. Well, a nickel gets 7.5 cents, gets you a 0.5 cent commission. 10 cents gives you 2 cents commission. 20 cents gives you 10 cents commission. 50 cents, okay, gives you basically 40 cents commission. I sold everything for 50 cents. I didn't, I never cared. I'm like, no, what? If they're willing to pay for it, why is that on me? So, but to your point, it was never authentic. It never felt good. It was always a mathematical equation. I actually had no feeling towards it. It was just a means to an end. And when I got the end, I was just as dissatisfied with the outcome as I was with the process. There was almost no joy on either end because of it, because I wasn't being authentic, to your point, because I wasn't really leaning into what it was. And I never followed the rules. I don't think rules matter. I think in life, as we've all understood, you have to live within a society, right? And you want to be respectful and live with people, right? So there are what I mean by outside rules, but rules in general are meaningless if they are not attached to who you are authentically. Like, you have to connect authentically with what is meaningful. Like, as an executive for a company, I never wanted to go out and do Instagram and TikToks and Facebook. I don't care anymore. Like, I love doing quick videos and TikTok, ridiculous videos, and just fun stuff that's inspirational and inspiring and quick. And I'm hoping will be helpful to people. I just do it now. I don't even care. Like, I used to have to look a certain way, present a certain thing. My Instagram is all about my family. Facebook was just strictly family and this. And I'm like, oh, like, stop creating all of these inauthentic rules, right? To your point, and find out, like, what do you enjoy doing, and how does that service people? Like, do that. And I don't get paid for any of this stuff. I love doing it. When I got paid the most, I was the most miserable.
Yeah, I was the same. I still worry because in that business I was in, I wanted to get out of it because we managed, many millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of client money, but you need to have a lot of scale in order to make the thing economic. And so our fees tended to be higher than some of the really big competitors. And then the asset committee, the investment committee, I was on the board as an owner of the business, but I wasn't on the investment committee. They decided to start to invest in some riskier assets, which I didn't like and didn't agree with. And one of the reasons was then the clients would still get a good return after fees. So to me, at that point, the model was broken. It was not sustainable. It wasn't authentic. It wasn't valid. And essentially, in my opinion, they raised the risk profile of the clients in order to get the fees and so blah, blah, blah. So we were having like a venture capitalist come in, they were going to buy a quarter of the firm. And I wanted to dilute my holding and work less, because obviously when you don't like doing a job, you don't want to be doing it, right? You want to go to your vacation house, which I, had in the South Island at that time. I was living in Auckland. So, and then the guy who'd founded the business, he was like, well, in his mind, that meant he was going to work hard to make me rich. So essentially it was very, very antagonistic and difficult deal, but he bought me out, which was great. So I walked away with a pile of cash. And I was very pleased because I used to worry every day that these riskier assets would have a train smash. And about 4 or 5 years later, it actually happens. That was the end of 2004. It was when the big downturn happened, what we call the GFC, the global financial crisis, the mortgage crisis, that originated
2008.
2008. Yeah. So 4 years later, that's actually what tipped the entire thing over. And the clients did lose money on those things that, they got them to invest in and they naively followed. And people did lose money. He'd sold the business at that point for a lot of money. And if I'd stayed in, I would have had, many, many more millions than I got. But I would have had to live with myself, right? Whereas those guys have disappeared off the radar. Actually, he died. And the other guy who was a partner in the firm, he's nowhere on social media. He's vanished off the face of the earth because his name is Mud. So I got out with my integrity and I was right completely about those assets, that they put in more and more of those. And then the whole thing dismantled and unraveled. But I was so glad that I walked away long before. And I was very sad that I couldn't influence. I had a 5-year restraint of trade and wasn't able to talk to any of the clients as part of the deal. And I didn't want to get back in that business anyway. So I had to walk away. And I suppose in the bigger picture, they weren't my responsibility. But I did feel some pangs around walking away from those people who trusted me, knowing that, in my opinion at the time, it was only a guess, my opinion, that their portfolios were unduly risky. And then the whole thing turned to custard, and some older people to lose money. A lot of people lost a lot of money in that downturn, but anyway, that's a long story which I've never told publicly before.
Yeah, and amazing, right? And so let's just unpack that for a few seconds, right? You're not responsible, for anybody. You can't create in anybody else's reality, right? I know people during that downturn that made boatloads of money. When I have an investor and a guy who's managing my portfolio that leaves, I follow him usually, or I get out. I'm done. As soon as that happens, and most people, by the way, do the same thing. So anybody that didn't leave, and just as an FYI to you, like from us looking at you, when I see my manager leave, I'm like, okay, like where am I going next? Like something's wrong. Like I know they can't talk. I know there's legal ties. It's a business, all that kind of stuff. So not only can you not create in anybody's reality, that moment was created for you to experience guilt in the illusion, knowing that guilt doesn't exist. Guilt is there as a limiting belief that you can actually control someone else's outcome, that you could have made a difference in. They would have found different ways to do this, right? Just like
if they were going to lose their money, they would have lost it anyway through one means or another. Yeah.
It doesn't make a difference, but we all feel guilt. We feel personal guilt because we believe we can make people's lives better. Like that's honestly a giant limiting belief. We're not heroes. Like we're here to experience and our own expansion, right, in the service of ourselves and everybody around us. That doesn't mean we're creating good or bad events in anybody's life, right? At the moment of interaction, and this goes back to what you were saying before, and we'll kind of tie back into that meditation. All we can do, the only thing we can do, is energetically send love, peace, happiness, and joy to every single person, every single relationship we have. So the only way that you could have, or I could have done anything in my past, the 4 or 5 people companies that I was working with, that in my company to make my company profitable, pushed them into a situation where some of them had to go bankrupt, right? They were having issues anyway. I could look at it and say, 100 different ways, right? But the only way to truly affect those people is to send them rays of love, of appreciation, and of enjoyment for them teaching you, for them participating in our reality. I didn't purposefully go out and ever try to hurt somebody, right? Sometimes your actions take place, and like we said, they're all connected. Along that line, there are things that are going to happen, right? So the way Joshua says it, if you want to fine tune, and he uses this description very specifically, if you want to fine tune that relationship, then during meditation, you have to see yourself in the center of all of your relationships, of your universe, as this big, beautiful ball of sun. And you are connected through strings to each relationship. And you have to send rays of sunlight through each string to that person with no connection to the outcome, only in love, health, joy, and appreciation. And yet you hope they receive it. And all they do is feel good about it. That is how we can absolutely, not creating someone else's, fine-tune relationships in our reality. And that, honestly, guilt melted away. I'm like, oh my God, I can do that. And I did that. Everybody I've ever had an argument with or whatever, I said just rays of love. Like, oh my God. And I felt so much better. I know I was giving them energetic rays of love, appreciation, with no attachment to the outcome or what may come of it or not come of
it. That's great. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Wayne Dyer had a phrase he used to repeat, which was, send them love and ask for nothing in return, which was good. It's a good concept, and you'd have your picture of how you might do that. But I like your thing where you talk about send them rays of love, and also the thing in that meditation that you devised recently where you talk about a string or connection from your heart to theirs. So that's far more specific, and that's something that's quite easy to picture mentally. I didn't realize until you started talking about this that I felt all that guilt around what happened.
Oh, sorry.
No, I've written it down. I'm going to process it as a manifestation event, that that in my estimation, I thought there was a risk. Nobody agreed with me. The market didn't agree with me. The people didn't agree with me. 4 years after I left, that risk manifested itself and things happened. And now, that was 2004, 2008. Now it's 2022. And here am I still, now that you mention it, oh yeah, I do feel some guilt around that. Now, so that's going to be a very good thing to unpack, is to, because clearly that's a limiting belief. It's a false belief. I don't have any responsibility for any of that. And so that's interesting to me, that I've been carrying somewhere in my psyche the weight of that thing. So I can jettison that in due course by processing it.
Yeah, it's your authentic self. That's who you are. You've always been this beautiful, loving, giving person, right? We get caught up in the illusion. We played that illusion business game. It's just business. It's not personal. Think about all the phrases, right, that we went through.
Yeah, you mentioned that the other day, and it's a classic, isn't it? It's just business, it's not personal, and business is business. In other words, I can screw you over, motherfucker, and it's just too bad. That's the way it is. That's the way it goes down.
I remember you didn't feel comfortable with that phrase so much you left your business. I didn't feel comfortable with that phrase so much I left my business. And I don't mean to dumb it down or simplify it to that one phrase, but it truly is. Our authentic self was telling us to love and support and do what you can to be of service to people. That was who our authentic self was telling us to be. Our outside illusion, the business world, was saying, why give up a nickel? You take that from people. Like, no. I want bigger fees, right? We fought it. We fought it for so long that it made our lives miserable. And then we just left and left it all. And then we carried the guilt for not being able to change it. Right? Because we're supposed to be successful and powerful. I should have been able to change that. You can't. It's an outside condition.
Yeah. And looking back, there was no way I could really have ever influenced any of that anyway. Like, it just wasn't doable. The thing was way beyond my obvious ability to control it. So I wrote down a few things before we started talking. The first one was this whole thing we talked about around the emotional bento box. Another thing is this call that we're probably going to have in maybe a week or so, or 2 weeks' time, where we're going to talk about creating instantaneous change in a relationship by changing your thinking about a person, which happened with my mother and happened with Barbara's son and with Jessica's sister. And so, and a number of things you said, and then the discussion with Susie kind of triggered that whole thing. So I just wanted to mention that I sent you an email, and we're going to be having that session. I know people will be interested to hear that. So it's probably going to be, I think I'm away anyway, so it's going to be in 1 or 2 episodes time. We're going to do this. Right. It's going to be amazing. And it's going to be true situations that happened. Wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it happen to myself, where I completely changed my thinking about my mother. And then instantly, even though she lives in a different city, the way she treated me changed perfectly, completely, profoundly, like 6 decades after the pattern established itself when I was 2 years old, and I was maybe 62 when it all changed. So that's going to be an amazing session with some extraordinary people, even more extraordinary than us potentially, Jerry. Like, Jessica is just an absolute magician. She's one of the more extraordinary people you will ever meet. So, and then another thing I wrote down was, I was playing with this idea today that just for today, to see how it goes, to, if I was an integrated or blended being, but that meaning that I was living as my spiritual self in the physical, what would that look like today if I did that just for a day, to live as my inner self, my higher self, or my spiritual being? So that's what I'm endeavoring to do today.
Wow.
That's just as a plaything for today, to see what happens.
By the way, that's a crazy powerful concept, right? Because I mean,
because if you say, well, let's look at it and be that way for the rest of our lives, that's a massive undertaking, and that is a mountain that looks too big to climb. And where do you even start? But if you say, well, let's just play with some of these ideas, and I'm sure it won't be perfect, and I'll be a human several times, but it would be like, if I was a spiritual being, how would I deal with this thing? And I have many opportunities to do that, including if I decide to look at the news or not. And if I do look at the news, how I judge the various events happening, such as the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. And also we've got these anti-mandate, anti-vax, anti-government protesters occupying Parliament down in Wellington, or up in Wellington where I am. So, and you know, they seem to be able to believe anything they want to believe. That, like I think they think that the government or the cops are spraying them with some negative ions or something and making them feel unwell. Whereas the fact is they've all got Omicron, I'd say, because they're all unvaxxed and got no masks and they're all in close proximity. And they're saying the government's spraying us with something, you know, toxic and terrible when they're doing this to us. And it's like, to me, it's like, okay, that's interesting thought convolution. So being neutral about all of that and those people will be interesting as well, to not judge them and to allow them to indulge in their exploration of fear in an intense sort of way. It reminds me a bit of a story I heard once about, and then I don't know if this is a true story or just a parable, but there's an end of the world cult, and all the people in the cult, the leader says the world is going to end on this date. And so they all prepare for that. And the date comes and goes and the world didn't end. And so somebody asks the leader of the cult, well, you said the world was going to end and that was certain forecast and it didn't end. What happened? And the leader says, our prayers saved us, saved the world.
Love it. You know, the mind, right? You just talk about some crazy stuff, right? So the trick is, so phase one and everything you're just talking about is not publicly trying to change people's opinion of their, not trying to publicly sway people's opinion of their points of view, right? Because in your mind, you may be doing it, but the first step is just don't voice it. Let people be who they're going to be, right? Let people decide whatever the government's spraying you.
Yeah, okay. And it actually makes no difference to me because I'm sitting here in rural Canterbury in the middle of the South Island, right? Hour and a half from the nearest city, looking over a beautiful harbour, and it's like one of the most beautiful places. And I'm sitting here and it's only a thought, right? And it's only a thought if I engage with the media. And if I've been tramping in the hiking, we call it tramping, we hiking in the mountains for years, you know, for a week, and I didn't know about it, then like that's a possibility as well. So to understand it's merely a thought and I can choose my thought and go from there, right?
So really well said. The first thing is I feel for myself in this whole process, right, is I want to prove to everybody that I'm smarter. I know what I'm talking about. I'm educated, right? So I try to sway people's opinions.
Yeah, that's a huge part of this. And it's easy to look down at these people and disdain them and say, oh, that's just really stupid, because they're thinking 5G is doing it to them. And, you know, it's very clear that they've all got Omicron because it's so transmissible. They're not vaxxed and there's no masks and they're in close proximity. And the sanitation's pretty bad as well on site. So, and I noticed that a lot of the stuff on Twitter and Reddit, which is where I do read Twitter and Reddit. With Reddit, I try to focus on the really positive stuff, like really cool and interesting stuff, like, you know, fountain pens and also
LOA, right?
Motorbikes and hi-fi and all that stuff. And Trace follows a beekeeping one. So, and those are wonderful constructive communities and people are really cool and supportive and helpful. So, but anyway, I also follow the stuff on Reddit, and I noticed that, and on Twitter in particular, that a lot of the comments are essentially, if I could paraphrase what's going on, the people are saying, I am so clever, you are so dumb, and I'm making fun of you and ridiculing you, which really comes down to a bad reflection, you might say, on the person making that comment. But my point is that they are more educated, more articulate, and they've got the voice, and they're actually imagining they're superior to the people who are protesting down in Parliament because they're more articulate and educated, and probably more intelligent too, for whatever that's worth, whatever that means.
Right, it goes both ways. The protesters believe, and some of them are wildly articulate and understandable, right? So both of them are hurling those I'm smarter, I'm better than you back and forth. And what the truth is, to be honest, I don't really know, nor do I care. I mean, we're having the same thing here in America, right? In Canada, you know,
it's a little similar to what happened in Ottawa. Yeah,
right. I mean, it's all, there's all of this stuff going on in different phases, but the discontent and the disagreement is always is based upon I'm smarter, I know better. How could you be so stupid, right? That's the underlining thought for whatever the other person, right? Why the other person, why what they're doing is wrong, right? And if you're judging it as right and wrong, so the first step is to not engage in that public debate. I have people come over for dinner. There's 15 or 16 people over for dinner. This politics always comes up, and it's I mentally you get you sort of find yourself getting pulled into that illusion. Just don't say it out loud, right? Trevor Moawad has this great story, right? He tells in his book, and this is a documented story where this a repairman was going into a train to repair one of the freezer cars, and he was told the doors were broken. He went in and the door locked and he couldn't get it open, and nobody could hear him. It's a soundproof.
He was stuck inside.
So his freezer car.
Wow.
And he started to write on the wall. He started, I'm oh my God, I've been in here 2 hours. No one can hear me. I'm going to die. I won't last 8 hours. Hour 6, I can't feel my hands anymore. I can't feel my feet anymore. This is the last message I'm going to write. And then he actually dies right then and there. Somebody comes the next day, they get him. It wasn't the freezer door that was broken. It was the freezer. The temperature in the car was 60 degrees. He believed so much that he was freezing. It's a documented case. He died of hypothermia.
Wow.
Like, that's how strong, we all know how strong our beliefs are, right? So these people either on the anti-protesting or protesting side, and if we get sucked into that conversation, that belief is transferred. That we open up that door, we attract those negative or positive ions. The first step, right?
That's a very good point, because there's fear on both sides, and that's why people are behaving the way they are. One of the things about the protest is that there are many different groups who are pissed off about different things who are protesting there. So it's hard for them to have a collective voice because there is no collective. They know they're pissed off, but they don't necessarily have the education or the ability to articulate what they're pissed off about, right? They know they're unhappy, and it may be a personal thing, or it may be they don't like the way the country's being governed, or whatever it might be. But what's interesting to me is quite a few of them, they are inarticulate. They know they're not happy, but they think it's this, but they can't really put their finger on it, which makes it impossible for them to argue their case coherently compared to some journalist or commentator or whatever who's got a fine degree and communicates beautifully and is very articulate and clear on what they believe. So, and it's a little bit like what happened with some of the Trump supporters, I think, because I think Hillary Clinton foolishly called them the deplorables. And it's that same kind of very elitist thing, like, I'm so superior to you. And I think that was probably her undoing. I think that was probably the end of any chance she had of actually becoming a president. But I don't know much about American politics. But anyway, I thought we have some politicians like that too, some left-wing intellectual educated politicians who have used similar language around some of these protesters, because they are uneducated, they're inarticulate, and some of them have got noisy Harley Davidson motorbikes and do burnouts and stuff like that, and it's not the way you and I would express our anger towards something if we felt it. But my point is that they are people and they have a valid viewpoint, even if we don't understand it. And it's easy for a bunch of other people to kind of pull a ninja mind trick on them based on their education and how articulate they are. Am I making any sense here?
Yeah, no, and I love your train of thought. The fact that we want to control how somebody protests or disagree with us, and what language they use, how they use that language. These are all forms of control. These are all limiting beliefs.
Yes, it all comes out of fear, doesn't it? It all comes out of fear on both sides. Yeah, and also, because a lot of it comes down with the need to be right. The intellectual ones want to be right because why do they want to be right? And well, because that's around fear as well, isn't it? That their identity and their persona is tied up in, I'm cleverer than most. I spend all this money on this education. I'm articulate. I get paid to do whatever I do. And if I'm wrong or lose an argument, I will lose face and I'll feel bad. Which all of really, what's that based on? That's based on what people think of you. So ultimately, these people are the intellectual ones are probably deeply in fear, among other things, of what people think of them, which is why so many people do the jobs they hate because the money's so good and they got all the toys and all the paraphernalia, the trips and the houses and everything else to show how clever and successful they are, and they can't give up the job they hate because what would people think? If I
It's
didn't have,
beautiful.
yeah,
And I mean, to that point, you just said the most beautiful thing. Jessica said today in our call today, right? Our coaching call, our uniqueness, our worthiness in the universe is defined by our uniqueness, not our conformity. The old way of thinking, which you just clearly defined in a beautiful, beautiful way, was money, wealth, status. We
yeah,
believe, because of the illusion, that our ability to be worthy in the universe is based upon our bank account and our title. When
yeah,
when really what it is based upon is our uniqueness. Some of us express that uniqueness by doing wheelies and burning out in front of Parliament. Others of us explain by coming up with some of the greatest scientific discoveries ever, or studying the stars, right? What is our uniqueness? That defines our worthiness in the universe. In the universe, the fact that we try to all, once again, let's go back to your original bento box, jam it into one of the corners of that bento box, right? That's where we, as a society, begin to miss what you and I are now becoming aware of. That, oh my God, like I no longer engage. Now I'm allowed a passive Italian from New York, right? I could engage in any kind of discussion on any planet, and I would shout people down with a 220-pound, 6-foot body that and lean into the conversation, right? Because I felt that was my way of, once again, convincing them I was smarter, I was right, I was right. I mean, you talk about the most silliest thing you could possibly do as a human. I was doing it for 50 years, literally, and thought that was my value. Put me in a board meeting with all these people in stuffy suits, afraid to say something. I'll say it. I'll say, I have no problem saying what the elephant is in the room. I want to record it.
yeah,
I want to, so, but that's once again the illusion. Simple.
yeah. Those are very good points you make, and it got me thinking about something I pulled out of somewhere, one of the Joshua things, and I'm making a course on personal branding, and one of the things I'm saying to people is that the only thing that's unique in a personal brand is the person, because we're not doing anything unique in the kind of work we do, but so the only element is unique as the individual. And if people can accept and understand that, and I've said to people, well, facial recognition software knows this about our faces, that they're all unique, and that's how facial recognition works. So if you can believe it about your face, can you believe it about you as a person? And I pulled out this quote from Joshua, which says, "No one else on earth has the same mental construct as you do. No one will ever or has ever had a mental construct that is even remotely similar to yours. This is what makes you and everyone else unique. The structure of the system of physical reality was designed for uniqueness." And here's this killer phrase: "The universe does not allow sameness or redundancy. Therefore, no one has ever, will ever, or could ever experience life as you are experiencing it." So I put in that with the title in my personal branding course, a woo-woo moment.
I love it, and it's beautiful the way you just said that. I mean, if you look at, look at mentorship. Look at how, once again, you and I will always enjoy this, the personal development industry, right? What do they always say? Find a mentor, chase that person, be that person. Our society is set up to mimic other people. Mentorship programs,
Yeah,
they're not designed to educate us to expand in our own uniqueness. What if, instead of saying, "Do you remember this?" I mean, it's been a while since I put a resume together, but the idea of what value can you bring to my company or to this company, right? What if it was, what type of uniqueness can you add to our family? What kind of diversity, not in skin color, not in religious beliefs, but what kind of uniqueness and diversity in thinking can you bring to this company? If that's how we went about life, how much more fuller would our life be?
yeah, that's huge. That's huge. I get the impression, and you probably know more about this than I do, that for kids, like school age kids, young kids now, like, what do you call that, elementary school or whatever, that these days, it used to be that a little girl, if it was her birthday, she could dress up as a fairy or a ballerina or something, right? Whereas these days, the kids have all these costumes and they cost very little because they're all made in China, and you can buy them because these cost a lot of money. But nowadays you see little girls, for example, out shopping or walking around with their mum, and they are wearing the ballerina or the fairy costume, and they're allowed to wear that. It's like, and kids are like, what would you like to wear today, dear? You know, what do you feel like? Who do you feel like? Who do you want to be today? Well, I want to be Superwoman today, or I'm going to be a ballerina, or, you know, I'm going to be a fairy, or whatever it might be. So in my day, that was, the code was very strict, and mum decided what I would wear. So there is some freedom of expression. And you've also mentioned deliberate and specific corporate policies or government policies around diverse hiring, and based on gender and ethnicity and all that, you know, color and so on. And I guess that is the first step as a society in recognizing that it has been in many areas like a white male dominated world. And we certainly grew up in that kind of world. But then the first step is to realize, well, white middle-class males have a certain point of view. Other people, even like white middle-class women, have a different point of view, because the female experience is different from the male. And a black person is going to have a different point of view as well. And somebody from a completely different country is going to have a different point of view. And then suddenly people realize, oh, there's actually some value in that. It's not just lip service to the government, you know, discrimination laws or rules or whatever. There is actually some genuine value in that. And then you get to the next level, where I look at a lot of the tech companies and service, you know, software as a service things I use, and they are based all over the world, and a lot of them are based in America, but they got contractors or staff all over the world, you know, in Eastern Europe and in Asia and Africa, whatever, you know, so India. So, and it's not just about the costs, you know, because some of those people are high paid. It's not just, you know, the wage arbitrage, like, you know, India, there's a lot of tech people in India, highly educated, very capable, but cost very little. But so what I'm saying is that it's the first big step for society, is to explicitly require diversity. And then from there becomes the true appreciation of diversity and uniqueness, I think, I hope. What do you think about all of that?
Yeah, you know, for me, you know, I really do like to step back and understand, you know, what uniqueness, and if we exchange some of those words, right, you know, what you value, what uniqueness can you bring to, you know, can you add to my life, can my experience? And I think it's huge. When I think society has perverted this idea of diversity. I don't think we can even use the word in the context that you and I are talking at this point in time, because I do think the society has jammed once again into a bento box, where it does mean gender, or it does mean race, or it does mean religion. And I think diversity has so much more about that. You have to think differently, right? You have to bring something to the table to encourage that self-discovery, that self-expansion, right? If you're doing that and you're being unique and you're being worthy within the universe, if you're stepping into a situation where my diversity is my color, my race, or my gender, well, how much uniqueness you're actually bringing, because color isn't really a differentiator. Now, culture is, obviously there's many different cultures that colors are associated with, and I fully understand that, you know. But for me, the way I see it and the way I look at it is, we're all unique and we all bring something to the party. And if we just leaned in and accepted our uniqueness, and then we're able to express that in groups, that group would benefit from your individual uniqueness, whatever that may be. I wouldn't even put it into a box.
Yeah,
I don't care gender. I don't care any of those things.
That's a
just
very good
be
point
unique
too,
self.
actually, about the label, that the label means nothing. And I'll give an example of what that. Trace's brother, who passed away recently, was gay, and she used to say, because he was a very interesting man, very clever, he knew a lot of stuff, and he was an amazing guy to talk to, and we became very good friends. And she used to say about him, the fact that he's gay is the least interesting thing about him. In other words, it doesn't define him in any way. What's interesting is that he's such a fun, engaging, interesting person. You know, we would always have a lot of fun and would always have amazing conversations. And so the fact that he was gay was by the by. There was an amazing skit in a show, an English comedy show called Little Britain, about this Welsh guy, and it was all about the only gay in the village. You know, he defined himself as being excessively gay, but it turns out he was far from the only gay in the village. But it was a spoof by a gay man, a gay comedian, about gayness being the unique factor. And when one of my step grandsons came out as gay when he was 14, 15, 16, he, in my opinion, thought he was special simply because he was gay. And I understand that, because coming out must be an incredibly hard thing to do, even today. And at 14, that's pretty amazing. So I guess that was partly a defense or a bubble he put around himself. But he's been to stay a few times lately. He's now 27, and he's really found who he is, and he loves himself. And he doesn't really play what I call the gay card anymore at all. In other words, he's confident in himself, he loves himself, and he's expressing himself as an interesting, wonderful human. And the fact that he's gay is completely by the by now. And I guess that's what you're saying, is that color in itself is not a differentiator. Of course, a colored person has completely different life experience from what I have, but so is growing up in America different for that matter. But you're saying it's really, that's the first step. At the next level is okay, bring your uniqueness as a person to me, not your category, not your pigeonhole, not your label. Let's see who you really are and let that shine. Forget about your label. You're not seeing it from the point of view of the label, but from the point of view of unique humanity.
Well, and if you do think of the way Joshua was teaching this, right, any other way is playing a victim card. Because every label out there that society has slapped on people, I said that before. I'm a loud, proud New Yorker, right? Passionate. I mean, that's sort of it's a joke. That's who the society labels me as. That's who society wanted me to label myself as, right? That's sort of how I identified myself as a business owner, as an entrepreneur. When all that was gone, when I moved from New York to Arizona, when I lost my business, my loudness, my passion, my Italianness, and my business didn't exist. I was a quiet kid in a pair of flip-flops and shorts, no more suits, no more pocket squares, no more hair slicked back. My hair got gray. I got glasses. I got tired. And it wasn't until then that I found out who I was. And we're all authentic beings of love in service of everybody. And if we stop for that moment, stop trying to put people in those categories, it's so hard to do. And that's why I said when we started this, if we can just stop verbalizing, saying out loud what society is arguing about, that's the first step. If we can stop agreeing or disagreeing with what people are saying, even in the small confines of a group dinner, and just listen to what people and play that sort of, be aware of it, play the observer, and just go, hey, I love everybody here, and they all have good points, and I hope we can all leave this dinner and still hug each other and say this is great. That's the first step. Even though in our mind we might be saying I agree with him, or I agree with her, or he's right and he's wrong, right? That's step two. Step two is just accepting it as it is perfect. Stop trying to control everything. It all goes back to this idea of control, right? Which is a huge limiting belief. I want to control what he thinks. I want to control why he or she believes themselves to be valuable. For a woman to say, my wife is a wildly smart woman, hugely more is smarter than I am, higher education, makes more money, been more successful. She's amazing across the board, amazing mother, all these different things, right? For me to say to her that we live in a male-dominated society, I'm like, we do? Like, oh, okay. Like, I don't think she sees it that way. Like, I mean, we could say it that way, but you can look at it two different ways. All men go to war and die. All men have labor jobs. All men have the worst jobs, or most men, make minimum wage, right? A large, Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about this all the time from the University of Toronto or Ottawa, I forget where, but a disproportionate amount of male men dominate the entire financial world. I get that, but from her perspective, the world's her oyster. She's dominated any business she's ever gone into. If she could be the only woman, she dominates it and does it with a smile on her face, never seeing anything. Enjoys groups that are all women or all men, and that's why she's successful and everything she does.
And I guess the thing is, you might say, like if you look at Wall Street or whatever and say the financial sector is dominated by white males, and to some extent the tech sector is as well, but it is more of a meritocracy. It's a bit more like science, like physics or something, where it actually is what you bring to the table. that matters. So there is more of a meritocracy in tech these days, but it's still male dominated. Although there are some men of Indian extraction who are heading some of the tech companies now. So, but that only matters if you decide that that is the pinnacle of achievement, right? So, I mean, I don't mean to sound corny or trite, but maybe what's required to be a Wall Street tycoon doesn't appeal to most women. Maybe it plays on men's insecurities or men's strengths or the things that matter to men. And I mean, I haven't been in finance. I would not want to do that. I wouldn't be wanting to do that job. I know that you and I could be making hundreds of millions of dollars a year if we decided to go into that world. But it's like, no, I wouldn't do that because I wouldn't have the life I wanted and I wouldn't be happy. So, I mean, ignoring about whether women or men prefer those things, forget that because that's sort of trite and contentious. But that assumes that those are pinnacle achievements, right? But what if they weren't pinnacle achievements? What if they were just odd things that people chose to do?
And that's just beautiful. And I think that's where Joshua, the teaching of Joshua, right? We discuss, it allows us to debate the conversation we're having now. It allows us to have this debate in a very enjoyable way, because it puts everything into this perspective of, are you being your authentic self? Are you living through fear and your limiting beliefs? And if you're living through fear and your limiting beliefs, you can see all this negativity that pops up. And not that one way is dispositive over every other way, right? But if you just look at it to be as transparent as you can, if you step up in love, everything does work out. Yeah. Irrational fears, and we're talking irrational fears, not physical fears, like, where someone comes up, puts a gun in your head and shoots you, right? That's a real
danger. Yeah.
That's a physical irrational fears. If you step up, and that is the beauty. Today Jessica said one other thing that it knocked me off my chair in terms of understanding, right? When we talk about what unconditional love is, and we talk about how that defines where you are in this universe. If you can love where you are, if you can love who you're with, if you can love your life the way it is at this possible moment, you're going to open the door to everything. Everything is going to be unlocked. Those three things, that's true unconditional love. But we don't walk into a situation that way, do we? And I mean we as a society, I don't mean you and I personally, right? Everything you and I have just been discussing, right, are great pros and cons on how to, if you look at the full context, on how to not walk into a situation in unconditional love.